It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyan. I may have gotten that name wrong, but...
Probably Ngan or something, but I don't know.
Yep. I'm trying to remember the way the audiobook pronounced it, and I think it was something along those lines. Would you like to do the plot today, or shall I?
Sure, I can do the plot. So in a sort of fantasy Greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere, there's three castes. There's the human paper caste, and then above them is the steel half-human, half-furry caste, and then above them is the moon, which is the entirely furry caste. And by furry, I mean animal demons, but also these guys are furries. And in a very Hunger Games-y sort of twist, the 8 girls of the paper caste must serve as concubines to the furry demon king, as a mark of their subjugation. And Lei, our protagonist, is nabbed to be a 9th concubine, and, is whisked off to be part of the emperor's harem, where sexual assault and also forbidden lesbian romance await.
I'd say that pretty much sums it up. Were I to try to do that summary, I would probably have spent less time on the world building and more time on this girl's mom was kidnapped from her village 9 or 10 years before, and then they returned for her to be taken off to the
yes,
the King's
but
Court.
It's not like her mom. But it's not like her mom was kidnapped and then they're returning for her because they're rebels or anything. Her mom was one of many women taken as an act of pacifying a broadly rebellious area. And Lei is taken partly because she's pretty, but mostly just because they're this is an empire that uses the kidnapping and sexual assault of women as a tool of subjugation.
Yep, that is...
This is YA, by the way.
Yeah, and we're gonna...
This is YA, honestly, because most adult fantasy is much more hesitant to deal with these issues, I think, as head-on as this book does.
Yeah, I'm going to... but the thing about it is that apart from those issues, it is extremely YA.
Yes! Which
is just confusing.
See, I don't think of it as confusing because I really do... Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Later,
no, this is, I think, going to be part of the crux of our discussion later.
Mm-hmm.
Are there lesbians in this book? Yes.
Yes.
Are there wizards? Yes.
The Demon King is a wizard, I would say.
The Demon King has a bunch of wizards.
The Demon King, he's a magical Demon King.
Well, yes, but only in so much as all of the furries are kind of magical.
Yes. He's not as much of a... It's fair. Okay, so we have our wizard figure is more of a powerful demon emperor who also commands a bunch of actual wizards.
Yeah. His motivations are not our standardly wizard motivations.
I mean, I think some of them are.
Yeah.
I think that this is to some degree...
it's right on with wizards as empire, certainly, but
it's also wizards as narcissists.
True. He's just younger than our usual wizard, I guess.
Exactly. No, this is
He's a baby wizard.
Very much sort of a baby wizard. Exactly. Mm-hmm. This is a baby wizard who instead of being able to nurture his horrible instincts until he can become a manipulator, is instead just a rapist who throws temper tantrums.
Yeah, just a boor. And a boar. I mean a bull.
No, a bull. Yeah. But yes.
And why should you read this book?
I mean, if you liked the Hunger Games and you're capable and similar kinds of dystopian YA, but you want things that are more gay and also more do not flinch away from the sexual assault, then you'll probably enjoy this book.
Yeah, I would say that's 100% correct. I have to give this book props right out of the gate for having the courage of its convictions in a way that exactly none of the fantasy written for adults that we've read does,
I would argue that Nine Fox Gambit does.
except perhaps for Nine Fox Gambit, which is probably the, in terms of horrible things happening to named characters, is probably the closest that we get to this book.
Yes.
Um, why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, content warnings abound.
Yes.
We can get into the content warnings. I guess I can just start listing them. I mean, aside from sexual assault, there's just a wide variety of violence against young women, mostly sexual, but also just physical. Also, in chapter 1, the main character's dog is brutally slaughtered in front of her.
That's true. The dog dies in this one. That's another thing that none of the
The
adult
dog dies
fantasy
in
books that
chapter 1.
I guess I should add whorephobia to this list. It's just a generally upsetting book. This is, and once again, the dog dies. I would skip the forward if I were you.
Yeah, it's fair. The forward is completely unnecessary.
Yeah, and it kind of leaves a sour taste in your mouth when you get into what the rest of the book is like. But you
The birth. You mean the thing with the birth blessing pendant?
no. I mean the publisher's note,
Oh,
which was present in both the print and audiobook versions.
fascinating. I was curious if it was going to be present in the audiobook. Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, the publisher's note. So this is a really interesting thing, which perhaps can wait until post spoiler zone. But there's a thing now with major authors, really, really big bestseller. Your book actually gets full page ads level. Major trade authors, and very commercial trade authors, starting their own imprints basically. And I have no idea what the finances are. I really hope that these authors are getting compensated, but because there's Rick Riordan's thing where having done his whole thing about Greek mythology, he's now giving book contracts to a bunch of authors of color mostly so that they can do world mythology. Yoon has a middle grade book in that imprint, Yoon Heli. And then there's apparently also James Patterson Presents.
Yes.
Which I did not know existed, except that, I picked this book up as a, YA lesbian fantasy book.
The tone of James Patterson's forward is, I think, works counter to the book's message and would best be skipped without you losing anything when you pick this book up.
I don't know if it runs counter to the book's message. This is a little bit like patting himself on the back for publishing this book.
I mean, maybe a book with this kind of content in it wouldn't have been published if it hadn't had what's his face's name behind it. So maybe he was right to do so. But regardless,
it's worth pointing out that James Patterson is generally known as that guy who has written more mystery novels than any 6 other authors you care to name. It's just you could fill an entire bookstore practically with James Patterson's murder mysteries.
And that's when we stop talking about James Patterson forever. If I were to sum up why you might not want to read this book, I think this book is very interesting, but I don't think it's fun. I don't think
it's definitely not fun.
It's not a good time, put it that way.
It is not a good time.
For reasons which we will get into at
for
great
reasons
length.
Which we've kind of already established.
I know, but I don't think we've even managed to really get across.
We really haven't.
Yeah.
I'll note that this book is a fairly quick read. And the thing is that it's actually,
it's pretty long for a YA novel, actually. It's about the same length as a lot of the adult fantasy books that we've done.
Yeah, a lot of YA gets pretty long, but it, and it could definitely use some trimming, but it moves along at a decent clip. I think that the writing is, I think
standard.
that it's competently, yeah, right. But honestly, it's it is perfectly competent YA, and I've read a lot of YA that is well below that bar.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this book a lot more than I did the last YA novel that we did. It was very both competently and conscientiously executed.
Yes, which makes but it is really hard to convey. I remember trying to convey to you when I had it on the list that, like, you know, because it's one thing to say, look, there's a lot of sexual assault that happens in this book. But the real thing about this book is that
we're going to the spoiler zone, and I must apologize. There won't be many jingles this time. This book does not give many opportunities for funny jokes.
Until, you know, the first person viewpoint character's rape happens, there's just this sense of dread permeating every page. One of the things that this book does, which I think is really interesting, is that it keeps letting you think that she's going to get out of it at the last minute.
Yes.
And I think that that is a really interesting choice, not because it's playing around with suspense, because I don't think that that's what it's doing. It's that every other character that's, you know, all of her, like, you know, friends and nemesis in this, like, concubine situation, which is very much a YA, you know, Hunger Games-y situation, or like The Selection, which is a terrible YA series about girls who are, like, competing to marry the prince. And, you know, and, like, you can kind of, if it weren't for the dread that's permeating this book, you could kind of just focus on that and focus on, you know, oh, well, here's her rival, and here's her rival's, you know, mean girl assistant, and here's her best friend, and here's her, like, love interest. And all of these girls have already been brutally raped by the time you get to Lay's sexual assault. And so the fact that it keeps making you think that Lay is going to escape, just, you know, in the end, it wouldn't matter, because, like, all this horrible stuff was still going on, just because, you know, you're not the one, you, the reader, aren't, like, seeing it happen on the page.
Well, right. And, like, this is one of the ways where I feel like this book is very genre savvy. And it's, I mean, and I don't know how much of this I'm projecting on it, and it's doing a lot of commentary on the kind of books that we've been reading, and also other sort of similar or related books. And one of those elements is the way that, we've had books where the threat of sexual assault is the prime driver of the plot, and sort of the dread of that is what motivates the main character, but it never
happens to anyone important.
Exactly. You know, it never happens to anybody who we care about. And this book sort of lets you think that's where it's going to go, even as everybody else experiences it. And which, you know, sort of deepens and deepens that sense of dread. You still sort of have this idea that because, or you would if you hadn't been told already, which I had, that you are going to, it's going to be the sort of same genre thing where the main character manages to escape, because this stuff never actually happens to a main character, you know?
Right. And that, you know, and that if you're just, like, clever and desperate enough, you know, that you can be the one who fights and gets away.
Exactly. And the book is saying, well, yeah, you could be the one who fights and gets away, but you're not going to get away without getting hurt, you know, right?
And eventually, right. You know, well, and, you know,
like,
and the thing is,
what does getting away look like? Where are you getting away to?
And yeah, exactly. And that, you know, because first she's the last one to be picked, and then, you know, she's, and then when she does get picked the first time, you know, she gets beaten up, but she doesn't actually get raped.
Right. But that experience alone is traumatic enough for her to, like, get serious trauma about it.
Which is reasonable, because, you know, she's still getting, like, sexually assaulted and then beaten over the head when she runs. And then, you know, the final time that she's called up by the Demon King, like, she's doing everything right. She's been, you know, she's been making all the sensible choices, and she has, like, she manages to, like, sneak, because she's you know, she was a herbalist, so she, like, sneaks some, like, sleeping or some like minor indigestion poison with her, and she's gonna, like, sneak it into his wine, and she has all this planning, and to some degree it doesn't matter, because I think that this book does a really good job of driving home the message that being a rape victim is not about how smart you are,
right,
or how
virtuous
brave you are. or
how
virtuous,
special
or
you are.
how special you are, how good a fighter you are.
Right.
That sometimes, that sometimes, yes, you can make choices for your own safety that work, but sometimes you can do absolutely everything right and it's not enough.
Like, one of the things that I really appreciated about this book is that a lot of thought went into the way that the rape is presented,
Right.
and also the way that the different characters react to being in this situation sort of acts as case studies of the way that different, personalities or people from different circumstances, more or less privileged relatively within the sphere of being a paper cast woman in this society,
Mm-hmm.
will figure out different ways to do it. I really loved Aoki as a character in this book, and her
Yeah.
arc vis-a-vis Lei. Aoki is like the first person that Lei befriends when she gets into the harem, and is sort of this bubbly, very innocent 16-year-old, and is and her reaction to the experience of getting raped by the king after sort of the initial period of trauma is to fall in love with him, essentially, and to defend him in a way that will be very familiar to people who have, seen narratives about people who defend their abusive partners or love interests, because he's always very
Right.
nice and sweet and caring to her.
Right.
And
And so the fact that, and this kind of allows her, even though she knows that, her best friend, like that her best friend has been beaten up and is, locked in a room to starve for a week and things like that, she just manages to compartmentalize all of that and go, well, he's always been so nice to me. And then even when Leia's like, really? What about the first time when, you came back like shaking and in tears? And she's like, well, now he makes me feel special.
right. And I really appreciated the way that this brings them into, like, you know, conflict in which, unforgivable things are said, but doesn't destroy their friendship ultimately.
Right.
Like, I thought that was very well observed, and sort of in
Mm-hmm.
contrast to Blue, who also
Yes.
has her own reasons for being miserable and, destroyed by the situation, as they all do, but whose reaction to it is very different, partially just because of the kind of privilege that she comes from,
Mm-hmm.
and the observation of the way that different women, because most of the actual violence that is administered in this book outside of the context of the king and his rapes is administered by women in the service of the king.
A fair amount of it is.
Either
A
by,
fair amount of what we see is.
yeah,
That's happening to Lei and the other concubine. They're called paper girls. Incidentally, I think I can't. I've decided that it is cute that their title is Zhi, which is paper.
and also
But
the and the king's fox guard slash bride,
that's true. Yes,
who is the one who kills the one, the one good guy, who, the thank you author for putting a good guy in the book, who is a wolf who
there's
smells
two.
nice.
There's
There's
two
her
because
dad
there's
also.
also the no, and also there's the owl.
Oh,
Who you
don't
found
talk to
really
me about the
annoying.
fucking owl. We'll get into that when we get into what about the book made me mad.
But yes, but no, because okay, but there's her dad.
Yeah.
There's the fox guard.
But like the fox guard
There
is the sort of man in a position of
or
authority,
wolf, I guess he's a wolf. He's the wolf guard. Yeah, who's like a man in a position of authority.
who's not a
who's
scumbag,
working,
who's working with
who's
the
not a
resistance.
scumbag. Who's like actively working to undermine the king from within. There's also the fox boy who sneaks her, who like gives her his food on the ship because he's basically like, you need this more than I do.
That's true. Yeah. No. So this is not a all men are awful book.
And it's also and it's also not a all like, it's interesting because it's initially set up, it could very much be that like this demonic thing is, that like the demons are in power and also evil.
Yeah. But
And that, that like how much, and so is this just people of different races can be evil? But it's actually, you see from the very beginning that, these castes are porous.
yeah, much is made
know.
by, explicitly, like Lei's mom always said, we're all the same under the skin. There are
But also, but
the
like
metaphor
her
breaks
dad's
down a little bit in ways which I'll get into later when I'm talking about the stuff about this book that irritated me. But yeah, no, it's the book at least tells you that the racial distinctions here don't affect people's goodness.
and that, but it's not even just their goodness. It's that even in a society that's not only very stratified, but is also very like there's very obvious markings, physical distinctions. It's still somewhat porous. I mean, her dad has an employee who's from a caste above him. Lay has a maid who's from the
Well,
caste above her.
that's I mean the employee is his girlfriend, surely. I know it's not explicitly stated,
Probably,
but
but I'm pretty. I get the impression that she was their employee. That she was also their employee when her mom was around. Um.
yes,
So,
but yeah, no, the
and also like Lay has a maid who's
right. The cast, as in real life, these sort of as in real life for the most part, these caste distinctions are more porous in practice than they are in theory.
right. And certainly Blue's family and Ren's family, Ren being the love interest, their families are definitely of their entirely human families are definitely of a higher status than say her dad's employee slash probably girlfriend.
Yeah, there are paper caste aristocrats and court officials because it was this is not an it was ever thus situation. This caste system was imposed upon the kingdom like 200 years ago or so. So
Right.
it's not outside of living memory that there was a different kind of
I think it's outside of living memory if it was about 200 years ago, but it's not. But it's
yeah,
not outside of
I
like
misused the phrase, but it's
yeah.
not outside
But
the scope of history. People know that it didn't always used to be this way.
yeah,
And they're speaking of like the various ways of the book. There is sort of this thing where the book has episodes whose purpose seems to be to catch bits of the discourse that might be brought up by the subject matter that it's doing. Like the good whore.
yes,
We should have added all the stuff about sex workers to the content warnings. I'm going to put that back in.
Oh yeah, violence against sex workers. I mean, to some degree, yeah, but I mean, yes, who's kind of. I mean, she's a good though. She's not entirely a sex worker. She's more a comfort woman.
Yes. She doesn't have a choice in her line of work, but it is the book is very much goes out of its way to not condemn women who find ways to sort of live within and enjoy the kind of work that they're doing, which even though it's clear that this woman is actually a slave and would much prefer to be doing something else, she's also like living her best life within the confines of the situation that she finds herself in, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a shame that they kill her because she's one of the better characters.
She's one of the better characters, and it's definitely a shame that she gets murdered.
Yeah, no, I have a very long list of things that I wish this book had done differently, which we'll get to, but also a fairly long list of things which I liked about it, which, there you go. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I wanted to point out, actually, speaking of ways in which this book is genre savvy, is that I think that it's deliberate, and
mm-hmm.
that before the sense of creeping dread kicks in,
mm-hmm.
like, or if you just use the plot of maybe the first half of this book without the point of view characters like mounting disgust and terror, mm-hmm. this could be a romance novel between where the king is ultimately I mean, he's tall, dark, and handsome. Much is made of his handsomeness and his youth.
Right. Yeah.
Like there, I think,
and the fact that sometimes he can be just very sweet and charming.
Yeah. No, I think that it's very intentional that the book wants to raise the possibility that you might find this situation like attractive for the wrong reasons, and then it wants to grind that out of the possibility of the reader just through this,
Yeah, I think
suffocating slow dread.
right. Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that because the book it does this in so many different ways. Because it does this with the maybe like an escape, maybe like an escape. But you're right. It also does this where, he's handsome. He can be charming. She gets so many pretty dresses.
She does. Meaningful pretty dresses.
Everybody gets so many beautiful dresses. They get, beautiful qipao. They get beautiful kimonos. They get beautiful hanfu.
I think it's just as an aside, I found it hilarious that while all the other like fantasy Asia books we've done have been a fantasy specific part of Asia, this one is just fantasy Asia. We're throwing in all of it.
Well, this is
and
that's
some
why
South
I called
Asia
it a
to boot.
greater. That's why I called it a Greater East Asia co-prosperity
Right,
sphere, because
exactly.
to some degree this is what, particularly, if you include some of it, what sort of Japan envisioned as its Asian empire.
Yes, but the demon capital, they're the Han. They're
Yes,
not,
they are.
not the folks with Japanese names.
Yeah, though I mean the Demon King has some Indian ancestry and some Japanese ties, and like it's the author says in her afterword mentions that part of the
I didn't get the afterword. I got the publisher's intro, but I didn't get the afterword.
You didn't get the afterword? Oh, you're too bad. You're missing out on the afterword, which, first of all, the author points out that part of why she wrote this book is to, because she wants to provide some of the sort of processing and hopefully empowering that, she had to go through herself.
Right.
But also, she talks about how one of the things that she grew up mixed race, part Malaysian Chinese, and she wants to sort of reflect the vast diversity of Asians that you get in like Southeast Asia.
Yeah, 100%. That is definitely not a thing I didn't like about this book. It is a thing that I found found cool.
It's a true multi-ethnic empire.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean you're totally right that if you remove the creeping, grinding dread, and discuss that the first half could almost be a romance because it's delicious food, beautiful dresses, all the girl, like sort of girl, like schoolgirl politics.
Yeah.
And so much is made out of how beautiful and special the main character is.
Yeah, with her golden eyes. I mean, there's a lot.
But not just with her golden eyes, with her being saved for last, which is the sort of thing that if this were again like the selection, this would, that's presented as charming and romantic, and as it is, it's horrifying.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of really good stuff about how Lei is simultaneously relieved and also kind of offended not to be chosen. Like she doesn't like losing out in this competition to Blue, even though she doesn't, even though the competition is awful and she doesn't want to be a part of any of it. There's still something about the way that this pits girls against each other. It's the Academy all over again, of course.
Yes.
That, she feels, even though, she very, very much does not want to win this particular game.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's all very good as well. Like everything that happens within the confines of the harem and which actually I was thinking that this was going to remind me of Girl Serpent Thorn. But in fact, it reminded me much more of other books that we've done, like Green, for example. Green sort of basically starts out in exactly the same way. It's just Green. The author of Green was horny for a very different set of reasons, or confronting his own horniness around this issue, and which makes me wonder, like, whether some readers will find this horny for the wrong reasons and will, be contending with that.
On the one hand, I'm sure there's got to be somebody. On the other hand, one of the things I really respect about this book is how, you know,
No room is
how
given for you to do that. If you do that, it is
like
on you.
this is right, like, and and like everybody's got their buttons, but like
Right.
this is the absolutely least eroticized sexual assault of any books that I think I've ever read.
Yes, maybe. But yes, it's certainly the least eroticized sexual assault out of any of the books that we've read for this podcast.
I'm sure I could dig deep and find something else, but just it is so thoroughly awful from start to finish. And it and it the stuff that gets shown is the violence, and the stuff and the sex is what gets cut away from usually. And then you get to see the aftermath, including when she's like staggering out with her clothes ripped off and like covered in blood, and all of and all of like the king's top guards and generals are just like, oh, yeah, well, we'll escort you home.
It's one of these again. Yeah.
Exactly.
Pretty awful. Off to talk about the romance we go.
Oh, we should talk about the romance, or is that?
Oh yeah, yeah. We haven't gotten to that yet.
We haven't actually talked about the lesbian part at all. And I mean, it's definitely not like the best and most compelling romance, but it's also not the worst. I wouldn't put in like things that irritate me. There's some genuinely sweet moments between them.
It's obvious why Ren is attractive. It doesn't feel forced. The Lay is very, very, very slow on the uptake. But you could chalk that up to a lot of different things,
including just the environment that she's in.
Exactly. I mean, but she's not just slow on the uptake about Ren. She's slow on the uptake about a lot of different things. But
yeah,
this is one of part of the unfortunate consequence of the way that this book is laid out with the creeping dread is that we all know what is going on and what is going to happen way before the POV character does, which is relatively frustrating. But yeah, no, Ren is the classic sort of cool, aloof, long-haired lesbian love interest.
Though it's worth pointing out that by the end, she is also a rape survivor. And,
she's a rape survivor before Lay is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it affects her differently.
Not when you first see her. Right, exactly. It affects her differently. But, like, this is, you don't always get to see somebody, like, it is actually cool to see somebody who gets to be, like, the gorgeous, cool badass with magical kung fu powers, who's also a rape survivor.
True.
And, like, who, like, this is clearly, and this isn't, something that she's just sort of grimly submits to for the revolution. Like, it is clear that this was also traumatizing for her.
Yes. Like, I mean, I think that we'll probably, speaking of superlatives about this book, this is out of every book that we've done, this is the read the sequel, you guys, book that we've read. Because so much is set up that doesn't get paid off.
Yeah.
But I imagine that we'll see that. I have faith that we would see that get played out more in the coming narrative, even though there's not a lot of room for that to happen here.
Right. I feel like some of these books, the romance kind of felt sort of shoehorned in, or just has not been compelling at all.
Yeah.
And this one is, it's perfectly charming. I'm totally willing to believe like that they're into each other. And not just for, purely two traumatized girls trapped in a terrible situation.
And I like that, as you pointed out, that despite the fact that Ren is like a legendary kick-ass, wuxia heroine whose powers are in her blood, ?
That goes into the things.
Yeah,
we'll save that for things that irritate us.
She can't be around to help Lay in the final analysis, and she couldn't save Lay from getting raped.
Or herself.
Right. It's like, no matter... It really does, as you say, go out of its way to point out over and over in a lot of different ways that, no matter... within the constraints of a society like this, and you can read that as literally or metaphorically as you want. You're going to have to face up to this, and also, no amount of magic is going to protect you 100% from this kind of violence.
Right. And I do like, one thing I liked about their romance is that the thing that seems to, that like one of the things that really attracts Ren to Lei is that Lei is resisting, and when Leia's like, but it didn't do any good, like that's not the point.
Right.
I enjoyed that it's not that she's not into Lei because Lei is a badass necessarily, but just because like Lei is still willing to fight even if she's not particularly good at it and it doesn't end up doing any good.
Yep. It is one of those things where it's like no change can happen without people refusing to accede to the powers that be, even though that will result in those people who resist getting crushed 99% of the time. Still, there's no change without people who are brave or obstinate or stupid enough to do it.
Right. And Ren, who's, and like that particularly makes sense to be something attractive, an attractive quality for Ren.
Who has never had a choice in this.
Who has never had a choice in this and has been, raised since birth to be, to be a rebel.
Yeah.
And to bring down the Demon King.
Indeed.
Who I have not read the sequel because I was waiting until the second and third books both came out because I generally have to reread the first book if I'm going to read, the second and third books in a trilogy, and I didn't want to have to reread this book more than once. So I think that I will probably read the second and third ones, of course, because I tend to. But one of the things I'm really interested in is we never see. I really want to know if the second and third books do anything about the Demon Queen.
Yeah, I imagine they must. I mean,
they must.
I want to get the subplot, which is that Ren clearly has a crush on the cat general woman who we never see. And I want to see whether there's this sort of jealous rivalry thing that might happen in later books. I mean, really the thing that I'm interested in about the sequels is that they're going to... what this book gives me the impression that the sequels are going to be very different than this book because...
Right.
How could they not be?
Right.
Because the overwhelming tone and structure that dominates this book is that passage of suffocating dread.
Right.
And everything that gets set up for later seems to be way more fun and frivolous,
right. Right. That's part of why I plan to read the second and third books is that I assume, my guess is that they're still going to be kind of brutal, but I assume that they've got to be more fun, right? There's probably going to be lots of like PTSD like processing and,
right.
And lots of horrible battles, but like hopefully we can get a lot more sort of swashbuckling and kissing going on here.
I imagine that we will, given who like the crew that we are set up to encounter going forward. So speaking of that crew, would this be an appropriate time for me to move into the things about this book that irritated me? Actually, no, we're talking about YA now.
Why is this YA book so much more brutal than, everything except for the machineries of Empire?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do, in fact.
I thought you might. Go for it.
So the thing is that, like, YA, there's two okay, so some YA is just very fluffy, particularly the YA that tends to be most enthusiastically read by adult readers of YA.
Yes.
Who are a fairly large contingent. But, like, a lot of YA is not. Like, I keep coming back to the Hunger Games because this book reminds me a lot of the Hunger Games in that it's, like, YA that is good and interesting and is really is not playing around with like the brutality of colonialism and empire, and I think that's because adults tend to read for escapism, and teenagers are more likely to want to like see their own trauma reflected in the stuff that they're reading. and it's not, of course, universal. Plenty of adults read to process trauma or just read because they, enjoy reading about horrible things. And plenty of teenagers read for escapism. But we tend to think that teenagers are children because, they're younger and their brains aren't finished forming, that like they're children, and that, they want that, they can be more easily scarred by this stuff, and that they want thus the kind of protection that like adults want to give children. But I mean, think about Roald Dahl, who's that's not even YA. Like,
Let's not talk
those
about
are kids' books.
I don't want to think about Roald Dahl. I know what you're saying though.
But okay, and so I think that adult readers of YA who want YA to be all of the less complicated things and the heightened emotions and the romance, but who also want it to be escapism, have kind of done YA a disservice.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I remember back when I was a teenager, I didn't read a lot of. I don't think that YA, as it is construed now, really existed when I was a teenager. It didn't exist.
No, it's a very much a post Hunger Games and Harry Potter genre.
I read.
Yeah, we read Sandman.
Yeah, I read Sandman. I read books that were like, and I read Sandman. Yeah. I read Harlan Ellison. I read.
I read Harlan Ellison too,
but yeah, that was my fault.
Enjoy it, right?
But like even before we met in those vastly vanished bygone times.
No, I mean we both read stuff that was not. That was
way more brutal than stuff that I would want to read now. To be honest with you,
and like I think that this is. It's funny, and think about what we were like as teenagers.
Yeah.
I think that some of the brutal stuff that we were reading, in some ways it was comforting, because when the experience of being a teenager is the experience of being acutely aware of the injustices of the world around you, and still largely powerless to do anything about it.
Yes, or even powerless to make your peace with it. Because you don't even have control over your own destiny at that point, or to the extent that one ever does, but like even less.
Right,
so.
Right, exactly. And like not only powerless to do anything about it on like a global stage, but even like powerless to do anything about it on an individual, personal stage.
Right.
And so and similarly, it's not just about being aware of the injustices around you, like global warming or whatever. It's also being aware of things like, wow, a lot of the adults in your life who have power over you are actually horrible people who are doing horrible things to powerless teenagers.
Yeah, no, the experience of awakening to that is just, there's nothing like it. Nothing like, and and
your brain hasn't even finished forming, so you can't even process all, like the emotions are just so much stronger, and you don't have the extra decades of life experience to temper them.
But you do at that point go to these books and you're like, am I insane or am I surrounded by scumbags? Am I just being paranoid and grumpy and hormonal like people are telling me I am? And then you look in these books and it's like, oh no, actually this confirms a lot of what I'm noticing around me. Or vice versa, if you, like me, read this shit way too young. Oh, those weren't just stories. This is actually the world.
Yeah. Right. And so, and so you read this, and I mean, you go, there are other people who feel this way. There are other people who, horrible things are happening to, who are powerless to stop it. And, and there's people who can fight to a greater or lesser degree. And so some, YA can be cathartic, and it can also be, confirmatory, I guess.
Yes.
In a society that we really do, I know that gaslight is a meme at this point, but we really do kind of genuinely gaslight teenagers into believing that the ways that they are treated, that that they are hormonal and unreliable for being justifiably upset about the ways that they're treated.
Yeah, I mean, in large part because adults have internalized that injustice and react angrily to the idea that things could have been any different or could be any different in the future. But
right, also because they're lazy and they don't want to necessarily have to deal with their children having problems.
Politics. But yes, you are absolutely correct.
Anyway, the moral of the story is that there's plenty of reasons why YA should be less flinching away from some of the horrible things in the world, and there's no reason why it needs to not do, like why it needs to be avoidant, and people really should stop assuming that all YA is, that YA has to be or always is like fluff about and love triangles.
Yes, stop protecting the children. They're into way freakier shit than you even know about.
Right, there's also that.
Okay, shall we move on
now,
to the zone of annoyance?
Let us move on to the zone of annoyance.
All right.
Which is like a sub-region inside the spoiler zone.
Zone of annoyance. Annoyance zone. So let me just circle back on some stuff that we've already covered. There's a lot of effort is made to make the racist setup for this book not be racist, but it actually is racist because the hard-coded differences in ability between the castes, and also the magical wuxia bloodline ninja powers.
Yeah, I mean, how many actual hard differences in ability do we see between the castes?
Flight,
some
for example.
people have wings.
Super strength.
And that's definitely. But the thing is, so one thing that bothers me less about it than most like inherent inborn magic, and I agree with you that it's annoying, but it is less annoying because it is presented as a continuum.
It is, which is good. Yes.
You can have a given full on furry demon moon cast person who is less able in any given area than a given paper cast person. And then you've got like your cast in the middle, which is basically just the people in
hybrids.
The middle. Right, the hybrid. But
half-breeds.
But so you can there are humans who are just as strong as, the strong moon people. The wings, the flying is a different thing. And of course the magical wuxia bloodline is another problem. But like by and large, this is not treated like some people are born special and most people are born normal.
Yes. Except our heroine's magical golden eyes.
Except for our love and I mean whatever. Some people are born with funny eye colors. That is. But the magical wuxia bloodline. That I don't know. Maybe that'll be problematized in the future volumes.
Could very well be. Really, they should. I think that the. So here, okay. I'm just gonna go in on this. The appearance of the owl annoyed me for a variety of reasons. One of which is that the description of the way that the description of how their flight works is completely nonsensical and physically impossible, and they're not even supposed to be magical. This is just supposed to be something they can do physically. Can you even picture how this is happening?
I mean, because he's like, it's like a giant owl, right?
Yeah.
And they're like hanging on, they're like on his back?
Yeah. But he doesn't have wings. He has weird arm wing hybrids, but he still has hands.
I assumed that's like a bat?
Yeah.
Where he's got like
his
hands
arms
at
would
the
have
ends.
to be so long. And
maybe they are. Look, we can. I'm willing to put that under. This is a fan.
yes.
I do not expect my giant magical bird people to actually conform to the laws of Earth, to like Earth's laws of aerodynamics.
Well, I do, thank you. And
No, you don't.
And secondly, why is this? The owl is being chased by the elite winged guard, who are all made up of predators like crows and vultures. I'm sorry, this is bird nerd shit, but
I know, I understand. Well, this is why they want him to join, is because they want him to like add to their predator cred.
His character, like the big he's Hagrid basically. He's this giant wisecracking, his appearance.
He definitely strikes an odd. It's like a major tonal shift in the book.
It's such a huge tonal shift, and I mean, this is
because he's so quippy in a way that like
it
nobody
really
else
is,
in the book
and also
is.
none of the jokes in this book are funny, and which that's a personal taste thing, but like if that was fine back when they were making sort of gallows humor jokes at each other about the horrible situation they were in, but it's going to be a problem come what this book I think wants to become now after we're done with that part. But yeah, no, I had a hard time with realizing the owl's sort of symbolic of the how sudden the shift into rollicking is going to get.
See, I'm not convinced that the next two books are going to be purely rollicking.
Well, it's hard to it's very difficult to judge this book on its own. Like, I feel like I can praise this book if you chop off like all of the world building that doesn't actually come up in this book. If you see what I mean. Like, I think
if you strip out like whatever's going on with the Demon Queen, or the fact that
the Demon Queen, the cat clans, the sickness, I mean, you need some sort of sickness to help with the king's characterization, but like
right.
The whole like, oh shit, suddenly we're 3/4 of the way through the book and we've just discovered that there is a group of magical ninjas that were slaughtered. And all of that stuff makes this as a standalone piece of fiction extremely unwieldy as a unified piece, which is particularly jarring given how well paced and constructed the thing inside it is.
It's very well paced and constructed, and it works pretty much until she kills, even though it turns out she was unsuccessful, the Demon King.
Yeah. No, I mean, everything got really like Avatar: The Last Airbender, maybe, everything got really fucking cartoon, and that felt strange. I mean,
you're right. No, you're right. And
maybe maybe the larger point is that, life goes on. After you've experienced this kind of trauma, do people who've been through this kind of trauma not get cartoons? Sure, you get your escapism. But within the same book, it felt really, really weird to me.
It was, I think that by and large, it wasn't quite like the owl was definitely jarring in a sort of, because he's so quippy.
Yeah.
And that's a really jarring tonal shift. The fact that it's funny because, Ren's like wuxia abilities get really built up, but then she gets yanked away. So it surprisingly, the like super ninja clan doesn't actually throw off the tone of the book very much.
Yeah, no, I actually don't mind that. In fact, as I mentioned before, I like the way that, her super special powers don't actually amount to much within the main plot of the book.
Right, because it turns out that like, social convention sometimes means that it does not matter how impressive your kung fu is if
exactly.
if you're called away to do your filial duty when you're to mourn your mother. Speaking of mothers, actually, this is not actually a grievance of mine. This is actually something I thought that they did well. I like that yet another way in which this story is trying to lull you into a sense of false security is the way that it really sets you up to believe that maybe Lei is going to be reunited with her mother.
Right. And Lei believes that
too. And then Lei and then that hope is slowly stripped away until right before he rapes her, the king informs her that actually he had all the kidnapped women from her village killed. Well, just to really drive home the like metaphorical and actual rape of empire.
Yes, exactly.
Like, and it's, on the one hand, it's not subtle with its, metaphor.
It's
But on
not
the other
subtle
hand,
about anything at all, but that's not the
right.
point.
But also, it kind of works because that is also exactly the kind of dick move that you would expect the Demon King
Oh
to
no, the
do.
king is full of symbolism like that. Like he loves that kind of symbolism,
Right.
which is
No, and
another
so,
really well observed. Again, we're going
yeah.
back to things that we like, but
Yeah.
no, the king's particular brand of personal nastiness and vindictiveness is really well observed dictator behavior.
Yep. Yeah, no, he's a very well depicted dictator. The king
Yeah.
is in general, I think, really well handled.
Yeah, very much so.
Things, yeah. I mean, the main thing that annoyed me was the magical bloodline thing, because that's my biggest pet peeve in almost all fantasy.
Yes.
That's not how humanity works, guys.
should-
And it doesn't work well as a metaphor either.
No. We have discussed previously how Queer Desires. This is another Queer Desires: The Revolutionary Moment book.
Yeah, this is a classic Queer Desires, the
Yeah,
Revolutionary
and
Moment
we've
book.
already discussed the problems with that as an idea, but it's made explicit like repeatedly in here how Lei is like, this is the seed of the moment where the one thing the king couldn't control is me kissing girls,
Right. On the other hand, it does a fairly good job of also being like, that, forming loving relationships, while not particularly effective in fighting empire, is actually something that can help you survive traumatic experiences.
Yeah, and like that's one of the reasons why I was really glad that Lei's friendship with Aoki survived. Although we'll see how that
We'll see how that
goes now that she's
now that
killed
Lei has,
the man that she's
or at
in
least,
love with, or
well,
thinks she
attempted
has.
to, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I've said my piece.
Yep.
I'm not at all happy about that whole bird sequence near the end. I was very, very unhappy with. But before that point, I was very impressed.
It's funny, you texted me being like, the owl was really annoying, and like, I had absolutely no memory of the owl. Like, I read the book,
Right? No, I mean,
when it first came out,
if I'd read
but
this
just,
book
like,
months
it had
ago,
not stuck in my mind
because
because
it's
there's
so
much,
incongruous.
it's so incongruous. It's
Yeah.
So.
But yes, no, I think it's a very interesting book, and I'm glad that we read it, even though, as I've mentioned, the experience of reading it was not always 100% pleasant.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next
Right.
week,
What are we doing next week?
we are doing a book that you have included, you said, purely to annoy me.
Yes! Not purely to annoy you, only like 90% to annoy you. But specifically what I said was, I found a book, it kind of qualifies, I'm tempted to put it on the list, but it is going to annoy the heck out of you in so many ways. And you're like, sure, put it on.
Well, I know what, I know what gets us the clicks, and that's me getting really upset about minor things like owls. So
I should. My takeaway from this book is Light from Uncommon Stars, was that this book deeply annoyed me on like 20 different levels, and yet I couldn't bring myself to hate it. So
we'll
that
see,
said,
we'll
I'm
see
not
if I can bring
rereading it.
myself to it. All right. I will read it, and we will
We will see.
we will see. All right. But until then, wizardsvslesbians@gmail.com, wizards versus lesbians .tumblr.com. Send us asks, send us recommendations, the
Yep.
the usual.
The usual.
Bye bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you later.